So hello everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Julie Lucas, this is Katie Rose Brosnan, and we are the Campus Outreach Coordinators here at the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. And today we're very excited to introduce Stephen Volz. He is the current faculty director at our Botswana program. We'll also have current student Hannah Lundberg be sharing a little bit about her experience. And then after that, Katie Rose and I will talk a little bit about next steps to take for those of you who are interested in applying for next spring's program. If you have any questions throughout, you can just kind of write those in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end. We'll also have a live question and answer session at the end as well.
Yes, but again, in the interest of preserving the internet bandwidth, we are going to remove from the presentation, and we will see you all at the end. So we're very interested to hear what Stephen's got going. Thanks.
All right. I think if I turn this off, you still have my sound, I hope. Do you still hear me?
Yes, we
I guess I'm off and running.
Yes, you're all good.
Okay, good. All right, yeah, this always feels strange. I did this similar webinar last spring, and I must say it feels awkward to talk at a computer screen, so I hope all of you can hear me and hope that this is helpful. I'm not sure what the procedure is for asking questions. I believe it's possible to type them, or we'll just wait till the end. So yeah, this webinar, I think I'm not going to give as much as I gave last spring. Last spring when I was on the verge of becoming the director, part of this was meant to be sort of a preview of the class that I'm teaching this year called Urban Africa, which is a history of cities and urbanization in Africa going from pre-colonial times up to the present. But I think the substance of that might still be helpful and interesting for you because obviously it has to do with Botswana. So what I did for this is showing some images, talking a little bit about the history of Botswana and its current culture and the city of Gaborone and what the relationship between the city of Gaborone, the capital of Botswana, and other communities in the country. So yeah, so for the purposes of this, I titled it Big Villages and Small Cities, Urbanization and Development of Botswana. And that's basically the thesis, if you will, of this mini lecture, is that historically, culturally in Botswana, what most people in English would call villages are, I would argue, that have been the center of social life, political life, economic life in Botswana. And it's only in the last 20, 30 years that the city of Gaborone has assumed supremacy, if you will, in the country as the capital of the national government. And so to explain that and give a little evidence to maybe flesh out what I mean, if this will let me go. All right, next slide down. For some reason, it won't go. Sorry, I'm going to readjust here. Let me go to a different view. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here's the Midwest. I'm trying to give you a sense of how large the country of Botswana is compared to the states that are home to the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. And here you see Botswana. That's by African standards, it's an average-sized country, and but by European standards, that was pretty big. But as you can see, I think most people tend to think of Africa itself as being small, or even Botswana as being some small country tucked away in the corner of Africa. But as you can see, it's quite large compared to the rest of compared to the Midwest. Probably about 1,000 miles across, and it takes some time to get from one end to the other. Botswana is located, well, here I'll do a little arrow, in the southern part of the continent. And there you can see it. It sort of straddles a couple of different climate vegetation zones, the sort of dry savanna areas into the desert. It's about as far south of the equator as Mexico is north of the equator. So one thing that means is that we are currently in late summer rather than late winter, nearing the end of the rainy season. We should get a couple more rainfalls, but by May we'll be sliding into the dry season when it will just be sunny skies and no rain. The country is dominated by the Kalahari Desert, which is kind of a misnomer. It's desert in terms of mostly being sand, but there's actually enough rainfall. It's mostly thorn trees and grass and so forth. I'll just keep going. This is some of the scenery, typical rural scenery in Botswana, showing you the freshly plowed fields in the background where they planted sorghum. In the foreground is a goat kraal surrounded by thorn bushes that have been used to keep the goats contained. And then a family under the shade of the tree there. One thing about the vegetation as a relatively dry country is the plants do what they can to survive, and mostly that means all these defense mechanisms. So this is an acacia thorn tree taken from a medium distance, and then up close you can see that it's crowded with these very sharp, long thorns that are meant to protect it from animals. Relatively dry country, although this year, I mean, it's been an extraordinary year in terms of rainfall this year. It's, I think, the statistics I heard is this is probably the third rainiest year they've had in more than 50 years. Normally, last year at this time, the reservoirs of the country were only, even at the end of the rainy season, were only about 10% full. They're all 100% full now, which they haven't been in a long time. But the rainy season, this is a picture showing you some cloudscape, showing you a more common occurrence in Botswana, which is rain clouds gathering but not dropping rain. And so one common saying in Botswana, in the language of Setswana, that is Maru Hasipula, clouds are not rain, which essentially is, you know, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. Here are some women pounding the staple food of Botswana, sorghum grain, into flour. This is actually at a primary school. And these women are volunteering their labor using donated grain from the government, and then that will be cooked into a porridge for the students at the primary school. This shows you a family renovating one of their houses out near the lands, the Kwamasimo, where they grow their crops, and here they are. They've renovated the walls, and they're now in the process of reconstructing the roof poles, and then they're going to replace the thatch on top. This is another sort of typical rural scene, showing you a group of houses. This is winter, however, as the people are out in the sun. They would not do that in the summer. This is inside one of those houses, showing you the customary iron three-legged pot cooking over a wood fire, cooking up their porridge for the day. This shows you a before and after scene, shows you the dramatic contrast between dry season and wet season. This view is across somebody's yard, showing you the dry on the left and the rain on the right. And this little map showing you the ethno-linguistic groups in Southern Africa. I think one thing that people are surprised to learn when they come here is, unlike, well, maybe it's similar to Europe, but Botswana has sort of claimed Botswana ethnic identity for its country, but in fact, the majority of Setswana speakers in Southern Africa reside in South Africa. So the modern-day boundary, in fact, divides the larger culture and ethnic group of the Tswana-speaking peoples. You'll see within the borders of Botswana, actually, there's quite a bit of diversity. About 80% of the people speak Setswana as their mother tongue. There are some significant ethnic minorities, the Bakalanga, the Baye, the Hambokushu. As you can see, the map live primarily in the north and the west of the country. All right, what is this for? Well, I think in my class, and I've sort of deleted some of the slides from last year's version, and one of the points I'm trying to make is taking a look at how societies in pre-colonial Southern Africa organize themselves and how communities organize themselves. And this archaeological diagram is meant to illustrate how a typical Sotho-Tswana community, or a Tswana community back in the 16th and 17th century would be organized, and showing how one characteristic of them is these clusters of extended families, clans, or lineages that sort of glom onto each other and form larger communities led by the chiefly family or lineage. And that's sort of how you'll see even today evidence of that. The major villages in Botswana, if you took an aerial shot, you'd see sort of the legacy of that, the remnants of that organization. This shows you a drawing made by William Burchell, who visited one of the southernmost Tswana towns in 1812, and one thing that struck him was how populous it was. That there was, he estimated, between 20 and 30,000 people living there, which at the time made it the largest community in Southern Africa, larger than Cape Town, larger than, for that matter, many cities in Europe. And so for me, in my class, and I think in general, it raises an interesting question of how do you define urban? I think a tendency is to think of Africa as sort of somehow inherently rural and quote-unquote traditional, or villages, and yet what do you do with a community like this one? Oops. So Oh, now I'm unmuted again. Okay. Yes, so anyways, the point being that Botswana, perhaps strikingly unusual for European visitors and even for modern, I think, observers or students of history would be surprised to know how large these communities really were. And so that's one of the points I made in my class, and I think we continue to make in Botswana, is it wasn't until about maybe 20 years after Botswana got its independence that Gaborone, the capital city, in fact had a larger population than the major chiefly capitals. And that during, well, at least during the first 20 years of Botswana's independence, the majority of people living in Gaborone, in fact, continued to think of the chiefly capitals as home. And my first, I mean, I should share, the first time in Botswana was about 30 years ago when I was a Peace Corps volunteer living in one of those villages. And it was very clear coming to the capital city in the weekends that it was almost entirely vacant because everyone would go home to their villages, and Gaborone just was not seen as home. It was a place you went to work for the government, but your real home, your family, your chief was somewhere else. So then here's some more historical pictures to illustrate the background to that phenomenon. This is Molopolole, as drawn by a German visitor in 1865, showing you again how densely populated it could be. At this point, it was about 25,000 people living there. This is some historical maps showing you how some of these chiefdoms, the extent of their territory during the 19th century, some of the major chiefdoms. And the reason I show that is because this continues into the colonial period, where the British colonized the area in 1885 and retained a lot of the chiefly authority. And the way they sort of respected that was they divided up the colony of the Bechuanaland Protectorate into these chiefly sort of ethnically defined reserves, the Bangwata, the Bakwena, and so forth. And interestingly, post-independence, you'll find that that pattern has continued, that the modern-day districts of modern-day Botswana continue to use what essentially are mid-19th century chiefly boundaries between Kweneng and central is the old Bangwata chieftain, the southern is the old Bangwata chieftain, and so on. So I would argue that Botswana today, as much as they may not talk about it in explicit terms, has retained a lot of their understandings of authority and how the society is organized. It really has earlier roots. This is then talking more about Gaborone, the capital city. You'll see on this map, it's meant to show you how one reason they cited the city where it is, the capital at independence, is because it's sort of between a couple of other major chiefdoms, the Bakatla, the Bakwena, the Bangokete, and the Batlokwa. Also is located on land owned by the British colonizers. It had been ceded to them by the chiefs as a place to build a railway and a police camp. And so they decided when they got independence to put the capital city in some place that would not privilege one chiefdom over another, or, and put another way, equally disadvantage all of them, to put this capital city sort of in quote-unquote no man's land where it could grow unfettered and unattached to chiefly politics. This shows you a drawing, the master plan for Gaborone, or as it was called then by the British, pronounced Gaborone, but the Setswana pronunciation is Gaborone. And it shows you the original idea was they were anticipating maybe a population of 5,000 to 10,000 people of civil servants, because at independence there was very few economic prospects for Botswana. And the expectation was that it would remain predominantly rural for a long time to come. But as it's turned out, Gaborone today is almost 300,000 people, and obviously far exceeded their expectations. Some basic things to say about Botswana is it really is a model of economic development in the continent. These numbers here help to illustrate some of that, how it's it sort of is extolled over and over for how well it's managed its mineral wealth, predominantly from diamonds. It's the #1 producer of gem diamonds in the world, produces, depending on how you count things, probably about a third of the world's gem diamonds come from Botswana, a country of 2 million people. And thankfully the government has used that mineral wealth for the most part wisely to build infrastructure and education and healthcare. And that's what these numbers help to illustrate, to show you how the miles of the roads have increased, the number of schools, the literacy, infant mortality decreased, number of doctors per person, and so forth, and GDP as well. So it really is if you're interested in learning about development in Africa, it's a good case study to learn about how it can happen. Now this is just more of a personal reflection of how development, I mean, you can look at the economic statistics, but another way to find evidence of development is just in each family in Botswana. And so for me, that's another way. For me, it's the family I lived with when I was a Peace Corps volunteer 32 years ago. I've kept in touch with over the years, and this next couple of pictures is meant to illustrate some of that. So this is their compound in 1987 on the left. 10 years later, you can see the family, several members of the family, the children graduated from school, have got further education and managed to get paying jobs with the government, and that money was put back into the family compound, including a pickup truck. Here's the family in 1987. At that point, the father of the family was working in the South African gold mines. The children were all in grade school and junior high school. This was 13 years later when I visited. By this point, oldest son had graduated from like a kind of a community college, and now he currently works in the revenue service for the government. The woman standing in the front with a red T-shirt, she's now a primary school teacher. The sister next to her, Oneiluwe, she actually stays at home. Montusi in the far left went to college in South Africa and is currently working for the Immigration Service and is stationed at the Botswana Embassy in New Delhi, India. Anyway, so I could go through all of them, but it's all meant to illustrate what the education has provided for the people of Botswana when they've been able to take advantage of that and do well enough on their exams. This is just a series of pictures taken from the top of the hill in the middle of Tamaga, and it's showing you, if you look carefully at all the compounds, the family compounds, you can see how the money earned from mostly government employment was sort of refunneled into the community to improve the housing there and to bring amenities. In 1987, the village had no electricity or indoor plumbing in any of the houses or any paved roads, but you can see 10 years later, some of the houses, every compound has a new building or two. 5 years after that, you can see, if I pointed them all out to you, you'd see a lot of new houses or houses whose roofs have been improved or otherwise have a car parked in the yard. 2010, another big dramatic shift as you go through these periodic cycles of drought and rain, and this was after a period of a couple of years of good rainfall, so you can see also it's quite a bit greener than it was earlier. And I thought it would only be fair to include this one. This is Hannah, sitting looking at that same view just about a month ago. And one striking change here, all the previous pictures, there was no rain clouds. This one, in the distance on the right, you'll see rain has just passed through, and there's another wave coming right after that. Yeah, so it's, and you can see it's quite a bit greener than it has been in a long time. And I think I'll just go through quickly pictures of education in Botswana. This is a typical scene in a junior secondary school. This was in 1987, the school where I taught. This is the school lunch program, which was the staple food sorghum porridge, bohobe, and you can see the students were all holding bowls of it. It's been cooked in a communal kitchen. This was 10 years later in the same school. Now they have a cafeteria and a much more varied diet. It includes meat. The time when I was there, they had meat maybe once a month for the school lunch. Now it's twice a week. This was the school library in 1987, shortly after we got electricity for the first time. And this was 10 years later, showing you that the government has supplied quite a few books and TV, VCR, and screen, and everything else. This shows you a road to Tamaga in 1987. There was very few paved roads in the country at the time, and even fewer bridges across riverbeds. So that's what's happened here is the heavy rains basically block the road, so everyone has to wait there for an hour, 2, 3 until the water goes down enough to allow vehicles to cross. This just shows you the road across the Kalahari. At that time it was just a sand track that took 2 or 3 days to cross. This is that same road in 2007, 20 years later, a fine, smooth, paved road that you can go 75 miles an hour on. And this is now some ACM student groups. We were just on a group trip the last week, which we had to change. The original plan was to go next week, but due to a student strike at the University of Botswana and subsequent closure of a suspension of classes for almost 4 weeks, we moved that trip to last week, and this shows you some of the students, including Hannah there with the orange baseball cap, with elephants in the background, the boat ride, when the elephants came right up to the boat. And then this is another view of that same trip, but this is a giraffe crossing behind one of our vehicles. Yeah, so basically those are the obligatory wildlife shots. You get 2 of them. Now back to Botswana. This is a grocery store in Gaborone. This is at the African Mall. This is showing you a Kentucky Fried Chicken in 1986. And then about 10 years later, the same restaurant that's been sort of upgraded. It shows you downtown Gaborone, a picture taken from the bridge across railroad tracks. This is the main bus station in Gaborone. It's kind of the national bus station where the buses leave for villages and other communities around the country. This shows you a diamond sorting center that was just built in 2007. It's an attempt by the government to make a little more money from their diamonds rather than simply exporting raw, unfinished diamonds. The idea, there's a recognition that the value of diamonds is 5 times greater if you can cut and polish them. And so the government has been trying to do that at this building by the airport. And so, yeah, so here's, I guess, getting to, so I'm going to talk about Botswana. So what is the ACM program in Botswana? It started, I think, about 12 years ago, so it's been running for a while. The basic outline of the program is you're here for approximately 18 weeks. At first, you take 4 classes while you're here. One is the Setswana language class, which ACM organizes on its own, and you take with the other students in the group. The second course, as you see listed there, is called the elective course. Basically, at the University of Botswana, there's a number of courses you can enroll in. You choose one of them. The third is the course. It's also the University of Botswana course, so it's open to Botswana students, but it's taught by the faculty director, whoever it happens to be, and my course is the one on urban Africa. And the fourth course is an independent study project that students work mostly on during the second half of the semester and produce a paper at the end of the semester. And it also mentions here you live in the University of Botswana dormitories. This year, I think virtually all of the students have a local roommates. Another component of it is field trips in the Gaborone area, where we sometimes visit the rural areas and some other things, kind of cultural trips. And then the mid-semester break. Normally, mid-semester break, you go to northern Botswana to the wildlife trip. So here's a few pictures that I took at the University of Botswana. This was a couple of years ago. This shows you one of the buildings. You can see it's a quite new campus, and they spent a lot of money on the buildings and the infrastructure. This is the dormitory where the ACM students stay, which has been sort of dubbed Las Vegas because when it was built, I think about 10 years ago, it was the newest and fanciest dorm on campus. It's like, that shows some wear and tear, I think, now, and I can maybe confirm that. But it's in it. But it acquired the nickname Las Vegas just because it was designed with international students in mind. The idea that it would attract international students. But I think it's mostly actually Botswana students. And this is another view of campus showing you the student center in the background. I think the clock is still at the same time now, 2 years later. And then this was a student. I took this picture of a student demonstration in 2012. Gives you a little flavor of what some of our students experienced in the last few weeks. There was a strike, but yeah, I'll talk about that for now. So maybe I'll turn it over to Julie and Katie Rose at this point.
Yes, thanks so much, Stephen. So we just wanted to give you some next steps for those of you who would be interested in applying for next spring's program. So the early deadline is March 15th next week, and then the final deadline is October 15th. If you are interested, we recommend you contact your off-campus study office because they usually have an application deadline that is earlier than ours, so we want to make sure you guys get that in. Also, if you could turn in the college application, we also have our own. In addition to that, we would need 2 letters of recommendation, a transcript, and then campus approval. So that's pretty much it for us. We would love to hear a little bit more about Hannah's experience. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about your independent study project.
What classes you ended up taking at UB, anything like that, because I know that that's something students always have a ton of questions about.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
So let's see. So on campus, I'm taking the Botswana language class, the Urban Africa class, which is the one taught by Professor Volz, and then the class that like goes with our independent study projects, which is development in Botswana. So far, I've not actually been able to do my independence or do my community placement thing yet because things have been a little up in the air here. But I'm hoping to work at a hospice that's in Gaborone and sort of look at palliative care, especially in like middle-income countries. So that should be interesting, and that's hopefully going to get going in the next week or so. And then my my University of Botswana class that I'm taking is called Contemporary African Philosophy. And so far there are 3 students in the class.
Oh.
So it's interesting that, you know, the smallest class I've ever taken is at this large university. But that was sort of just the way things turned out. But it's a really interesting class, and I'm enjoying it a lot. So yeah, I have my roommate is from Botswana. She's really great. She helps me with my Setswana sometimes. She playfully makes fun of me for being terrible at Setswana. And I don't know. It's nice being around here. Let's see. I don't know. What else should I talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, if Stephen has any suggestions. Otherwise, I know a lot of students, like, Botswana is not on everyone's radar before they go, so if you maybe want to talk about what drew you initially to the program, what sort of experience you may have had, like, that drew you to this, is it connected to your major, things like that, like what is like, I think you said at the beginning that you had been maybe looking at a program in South Africa, so you were interested in the region, but what drew you eventually to this program?
Yeah, so I'm an English major with a global development studies concentration, so I knew I wanted to do my study abroad experience with somewhere where I could like more critically look at development and be like in that place. So yes, I was originally planning to be in Cape Town for my study abroad experience, and then that was complicated, so I ended up doing this instead.
I'm going to turn on our air conditioner.
And as it turned out, I'm like very happy that I ended up going to Botswana instead of South Africa. Sorry.
Wait, this is a dumb little thing. All right.
Because I think in a lot of ways I really have been able to look at development more critically, being in Botswana rather than being in, you know, super developed Cape Town in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I guess that's how I ended up here.
Julie and I were saying that we loved that photo of you overlooking the village. Then if you wanted to talk a little bit about sort of getting out of Gaborone, just because I know that we often also have students having questions about like, all right, well, what happens when you leave? Like how different is like the countryside versus Gaborone? And I know that that's a huge part of Stephen's class, us talking about sort of the linkage between that.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, for the most part, we are in Gaborone and on campus especially. And so I guess one thing also is I think I was a little worried about, like, oh, what am I going to do with my time? But, like, you find things to do. Partly just that a lot of, like, basic activities, like, take some more time than they would in the United States. So just to, like, I need to go do my laundry is a several-hour excursion. But then getting outside of Gaborone, we did a weekend homestay in Habane, which is a nearby village, and that was a really neat experience to, you know, I had a host family for the weekend, and I cooked with them, and I hung out with kids, and got to, like, really, like, learn a lot more about just, like, how people operate in day-to-day life, especially, like, outside of Gaborone, which is, you know, has a lot more of the, like, elements of westernization are present in Gaborone, and so that was really neat, and it's definitely like a different environment. You know, just looking around when you're in like in Habane, there's like one paved road through the town, and for the most part it's like dirt paths. Also, it was just interesting to see like the way the community is set up. It's a lot more like focused around like family groups, which is something that we've been talking about in urban Africa, of how like African communities are often organized closer to that way. And so that was interesting to just see like how that community functioned. And then I guess my other I went with Professor Volz to Tamaha, which is the community where he was in the Peace Corps. And so that was a Saturday morning excursion where we got to sort of see what another place outside of Haberoni looks like. It's pretty reasonable to get outside of Haberoni if you want to. You can pretty easily use the Combi system, which is kind of like buses in Haberoni, to get to the bus station and then get on another one that can take you to an outlying area. I haven't done a ton of that yet, but I think as the semester goes on, I might venture out a little bit more.
And I'm including an assignment that will compel you or oblige you.
So I guess I will be going.
Spoiler alert for your upcoming homework, I guess. That is so awesome. I will do one last check to see if any folks have other questions. We appreciate you coming in and hanging out. I hope. Are you looking forward to the end of the rainy season, start of the dry season, or is it going to, or is that like a cause of some trepidation for you all?
I don't know. I mean, the rain has been intense. That's one of the things where, I just brought a raincoat and not a raincoat and an umbrella. And if you go out in this raincoat, you're still completely soaking wet.
Yeah,
so,
you need a poncho.
Yes. Just layers of rain jackets. Oh my gosh. Well, that's good for us to know. And to be able to pass on to future students.
Yes.
Hannah, thank you so much. Stephen, thank you.
If students have questions, how would we know if they have questions
We
who are listening on the webinar?
Incorporating some of them as we've gone along. And then if folks who watch this or have questions after the fact, all of our contact information is up on the ACM website where this will be posted and shared out on social media. So if folks have more questions going forward, we will be able to connect them with you, with our upcoming faculty, with anybody who can answer their questions.
Yeah, because I think they just selected the director for next year, and I believe it's a biology professor. So that's something to keep in mind for the students who are interested in the program. So it'll be the emphasis is going to be public health.
Fantastic.
So anyone who's pre-med or has a biology major, has any interest in sort of sciences, I think might have a particular interest in doing the ACM Botswana program next year.
Thank you so much. We appreciate everyone who came in and joined us. Stephen and Hannah, thank you all again so much. Always a pleasure. Good luck with the rest of the term. Hannah, good luck with that assignment where you are venturing out and about in the world. And
I'm delighted and surprised that the internet held out for the entire half hour.
As are we. Which is wonderful. So the stars aligned on that one.
Yes. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Yes.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.